and the Vital Voices honorees, Global Trailblazer honorees.
Thank you.
For 2024. So Maria, give us a snapshot of what's going on in the world. We talked at the end of last year about how this would be the year that it was a referendum on democracy, with more elections happening than ever before, more than half the population living in countries where there would be national elections. Here we are in September. How are we doing?
Okay, let me tell you what others will say first before I tell you my bleak assessment. I mean, people are saying it's not as bad as we had expected it to be. And I'm saying it is worse than it should be. Right? It is absolutely true. There are good cases. Taiwan, which we had expected to be good a year ago. Poland, which we had expected to be good, and you're going to be in Poland, right? Like,
and women were instrumental.
Absolutely. It was because, that government expected to win, but they passed an abortion law that brought women and youth to vote and to the streets, right? But beyond that, India, you look at the world's largest democracy, and people will say, well, it kind of shows Modi didn't do as well. That's like saying one man's terrorist is another man's freedom fighter. Because your question is, would it have been better if information operations, if generative AI, if deepfakes weren't part of the landscape? And of course, we're headed to the one that the entire world is looking at, which is the United States elections. And, when I saw the shooting of Trump, and when you look at the kinds of guardrails that have been taken off social media, both the American platforms and TikTok, right? When you looked at that, it seemed set, hate was going to win, division was going to win. And now America's going through something very strange, very, it's not something that actually went into what we saw in the Philippines in 2022, which is that inspiration spreads as fast as anger online.
Does it?
This is, in 2022, we did a 4-layer pyramid, a whole of society approach, and we did it with the Google News Initiative. And it showed us every single member, so there were about 150 different groups, every person who's a member of these 150 groups in the second layer, which is the distribution layer, we called it the mesh, needed to share boring fact checks, but they had to share it daily with emotion. And they couldn't use fear, they couldn't use anger, right? And what we found in the 3 months we did that exercise was that inspiration spreads as fast as anger.
Wow.
And that's interesting to see this rolling out in America. And it's going to be, the world is watching.
The world is watching. Absolutely. You talk about fear, anger, cynicism, violence, the playbook for authoritarianism, right?
Yeah.
How do we create an alternative playbook? What does that playbook look like? Particularly one that is led by women, and certainly at Vital Voices, what we have seen is that women do lead differently. Not all women, but by and large, more often than not, women lead in a collaborative way, in an inclusive way, in a cause-driven way. Just really sheerly the way that they think about going for power. They're going for power and trying to achieve that power to empower other people in the issues they care about, not to just seek power for the sake of power. Right? So if we think about all of that, one of the things we're going to be talking about in Poland is really how do we create this sort of counter playbook? What do you think those critical elements would be, and what are some of the lessons that we could learn from other places around the world?
Yeah, I think we're seeing this play out in real time right now. Women leaders all around the world have been targeted in information operations, right? And what, I've certainly gone through this. Hillary Clinton, what I would say was ground zero. You had a woman senator in the Philippines who was the former Justice Secretary, Laila de Lima, who was imprisoned for almost 7 years, right? She was just cleared of all the charges. The online attacks against her, against me, these were exponential. And the end goal, let's Jacinda Ardern, right? The end goal of all of these attacks is to pound people to silence, perspectives to silence. And Madeleine Albright came out, I mean, years ago, she called it hashtag not the cost.
Not the goth, yes.
That women should not be stifled, pushed down, right? We tend to look at these as one-offs, like it's like poor Maria or poor Lila or poor Hillary. But it isn't that. Attacks against women are the first tactic. What we used to call gender disinformation is the first tactic to take women's voices out. When you do that, you simultaneously inflame. And it's almost like giving men and anyone permission to attack, right? It took us decades to get to where we are able to fight for women's rights, to actually, for my generation and the generation after your generation, to be able to exercise these powers. And now that we have, the technology has been used against us. Having said that, so that's the negative part, right? But the positive part of this is, look at the women who wield the power and push up against it. And I would point to people like Michelle Bachelet in Chile, also part of Vital Voices, right? Look at the acceptance speech of Kamala Harris. This was fascinating to me because she could have pointed out that she is a Black woman, that she is Indian heritage, but she didn't. Or that she was a woman even, right? She didn't point out any of that. What she did was to make it be all-inclusive. And again, whoever you choose to vote for, if you are a woman leader, one of the first things is that it's only, I guess I call it, you are a leader and you happen to be a woman, right? Diane, right? For everything that's there. So it's a tough world right now because the platforms, the technology that connects all of us in terms of distribution and reach, except Zoom, which has no manipulation on it, right?
It's not yet.
This actually, right, should be the way tech platforms work. But if you look at the social media platforms, if you look at YouTube, their algorithms are used against women oftentimes and inflame fear, anger, and hate, right? So Facebook is very clear, right?
Can I ask you about that? Just why? Why going after women? I want to read to you actually just a quote from Secretary Clinton in her new book she has coming out, Something Lost and Something Gained, which is really exciting. It's coming out soon. And I think just a number of lessons that she's learned. And I think just honesty, which is so needed in the world right now. She says, around the world, women's rights are often among the first thing authoritarians target, usually cloaked in the mantle of traditional family values and religious bias. Why? Why does targeting women, why is it such an effective tool?
It gives society permission to go back to the Dark Ages. Because in a way, sexism, misogyny. I've had a president in the Philippines, Rodrigo Duterte, who, people called him, well, let's not say what people called him, but Rodrigo Duterte, we came from a time, he's like the grandfather who, in his time, sexism was embedded. And when he became president, his misogyny then gave everyone else permission to carry this out. So that quote from Hillary Clinton's book, from Secretary Clinton's book, is actually perfect because it harkens back. It's almost the same way that anyone who has lost power because of progress, right? Women hold up half the sky. That's the other part. Women now hold positions of power, and leadership by women is slightly different. It may not be seen as strong, or may be seen as stronger, but regardless, whoever loses power can, what's the right word? Let me give you another example from the Philippines, because everything I think about in the United States is too political. but in the Philippines in 2013, the Philippines has had 2 female presidents already by 2013, right? But in 2013, Rappler did a a nationwide survey where we asked people, if you have a man and a woman with equal qualifications, who would you hire? 71% said they would hire the man. And that isn't that they're against women, but this is kind of, it's a past that society has moved against. And this, the quote of Secretary Clinton that it's these quote conservative values, I don't think those are conservative values. They're from the dark ages that women have pushed against.
Yes, absolutely. You talk about reclaiming, how can we reclaim some of these platforms that have gone to the dark side?
That's a perfect way of saying it. It is the dark side. I think it moved from immoral to amoral, right? At a certain point, when you know that your company, your platform aided genocide, right? You know there is something wrong. How can we? I mean, look, in the long term, we keep talking about education, right? But every day we do not act in the present makes this a far more dystopian future. In the medium term, there has to be legislation, and in the absence of American legislation, you're seeing the EU adopt the Digital Services Act, the Digital Markets Act. It now has an AI Act. In the short term, what we're seeing is our court cases now that are coming up, right? There was an antitrust case against Google that was last month. In the last few days, you had a case in, I think it's in Pennsylvania, where a 10-year-old girl on TikTok, right, was fed video of it's an asphyxiation video, like it's blackout or something like that. She was fed it, she watched it, and then she killed herself, not meaning to, but she was 10 years old. So the question you have to have is, if a person had fed this to a 10-year-old child, would they be liable? So there was a decision that came out in that. And then the other part is the Department of Justice in the last few days actually finally acted on something called doppelganger, which was exposed 2 years ago. This is Russian disinformation, right? The manipulation of people without them knowing this into believing lies that go directly to geopolitical power. So this is, I think impunity must stop. And it's funny, the US government has moved forward on TikTok, but has done very little about the American social media companies that rule the world. When you talk about misogyny and gender disinformation, or what the government now calls TFGBV, right? Technology facilitated gender-based violence. And even that, it makes me crazy that we go to this acronym because gender disinformation has been politicized. Women should be protected. Children should be protected. This is not political in any way, in the same sense that putting building codes or a drug, testing drugs before you roll it out in the marketplace. This is about safety.
Right, exactly. So when we think about what's happening around the world, and particularly the rise of violence against women online, tech facilitated, as you said, gender-based violence, what are some of the methods, and are there particular countries around the world that you think are making strides forward? I know Australia. Where are places around the world where you're seeing some bright lights there? Because I think from our perspective, obviously this is about safety, but it's also pushing women off their leadership path.
Absolutely.
They're deciding not to run, but it's not just about politics. It's about expressing your opinion, being a writer or a journalist online, expressing your opinion as a business leader, as a journalist, as a human rights leader, and being attacked. And maybe it's not even a person. So where you talked about the EU as well, but where are you seeing those strides forward that can be adopted potentially elsewhere?
The reality is that if America moved, it could do much more. it would have far more impact because these are American companies. And America has proven when it wants to act, it can, right? The move to ban TikTok, for example. If you're going to ban TikTok, what about the American companies, right? And also, I guess, just to on that EU, when the EU was deliberating on the legislation that it rolled out, these companies, the American companies, rolled out 125 million euros in lobbying. The same thing happening here, but I'm not giving you, let me give you where are the bright spots? They're isolated in many instances because you have to work 4 times harder to stay in the same place, right? Even in the EU, you've had the finance minister, you've had women leaders who opt out because their families, their homes are getting doxxed, their children are getting threatened. In the UK, a woman leader was killed, right? These are all realities we have to deal with. The Vital Voices report that's coming out looks at a woman who used to work for TikTok and is now in charge of safety in Australia, e-safety in Australia, Julie Emmett Grant, right? But in order to continue doing this, again, women leaders have to accept so much more danger. They have to sacrifice much more. And that shouldn't be the case.
There's a very scary statistic about the rise of these, deep fake porn websites.
Yes.
And the fact that they only need like maybe 1 or 2 pictures.
Yes.
That there has been growth from 2022 to 2023 of 3,000%. That is
Yes.
crazy.
Yes.
And very, very scary because it's also targeting middle school girls. I mean, so now we're not talking about women who are publicly out there as leaders, but this is just being weaponized against young people, kids, right?
Right. No, absolutely. I mean, again, if you think about it, the mindset of Silicon Valley is move fast, break things. I mean, they won't use that now, but literally they have broken values and in many cases, democracy, right? So if you look at it, even something, a service like Clear, for example, right, which has taken all the photos and then is able to use that as a foundation for a startup. What you're referring to is a startup that literally did porn, like it was for fun. It would just take photos and then turn them into pornographic photos. And again, it required action to stop that startup, right? But it wasn't legislative action.
Right.
So I think that's part of the reason that, you move fast, break things. When you break the law in the physical world, it should be the same as the virtual world, right? Why do we have 2 different sets of laws from the physical to the virtual? And I think that's where we need to go, right? The same way that human rights, values of human rights need to get put in place. It can't be surveillance capitalism for profit all the time.
I want to go back to talking about how do women leaders push back against this rise of authoritarianism and the rollback of women's rights coupled with that. And you'll remember Nika Kovic, who was also honored on the same night as she was the Vital Voices Global Leadership Award. She's a young woman from Slovenia, might even be online with us. She's coming to our summit in Poland. And what I find so compelling about what she did in Slovenia was really to almost like jujitsu these angry authoritarian leaders, right, who are using all these tactics against her and understanding like I can't go toe to toe with someone who is, using cynicism and fear and violence and threatening me and having more power than me at the time. That was the prime minister going after her and his cronies who were being knocked out of power because of her. And here's this young woman. And they really kind of turned it. And I think sort of use, in jujitsu, it's like using the force, the person's own force against them, really enabled them to totally change the narrative. And I just wonder, where else in the world are you seeing almost this idea of, okay, and we certainly see it with the United States election. I mean, she's paying very close attention, Kamala Harris,
Yeah,
to, here's that
Yeah.
playbook, we gotta create this other playbook.
yeah,
Where, it's like, you can't go toe to toe with these guys, you have to do something else. So what are the tactics of that something else that really work? Because I think that's, just back to
Yeah.
the Poland summit, that's really what we're gonna be digging into. And I think about, I mean, what were your tactics, I mean,
Yeah.
you've, her book is right here. Can you see it there? Oh, yes, you can, just the bottom of it.
Well, so let me tell you why I have such a hard time with this, because first is it means we have to accept how crappy the design of the social media landscape is, right? In order to turn it around this way. And this is, part of it is because I run a news organization, and a lot of the lobby goes to news organizations. Journalists should find better forms. And I'm like thinking, well, actually, no, right? Like you are taking nuance out of the conversation. You are taking thinking slow out of the public information ecosystem. I think we need to first demand better, that we need to live in a world of ideas where women and men can be safe in expressing ideas and are able to actually have a shared reality. So let me first state that I think that really, I think I have a lot of suppressed anger in having dealt with this stuff. But okay, so let's say that's what we're going to go for in the medium term, right? Because think about it, even Kamala Harris, any women leader today has to actually find different ways, has to turn cartwheels in order to get any message across where you can think about it, right? What happens to policy? What happens to governance? So we now brought it to the basement level and below, right? So having said that, if this is all we have, and this is what has worked, you have to bring it into the physical world. You have to organize and you have to demand better. Because if we play in the virtual world, we only make these companies richer, right? This is so, what have I learned? I've learned two things that I hope does not happen to you, right? The first is in many ways, you become a stoic if you get attacked, because it is asymmetrical warfare, right? Nika is great, but she's young. And she also came from, she wasn't a head of state. Who, if you're our head of state, or again, I'm not a head of state, but I was older with enough power. When you respond to that, you actually amplify it. So it becomes more difficult, right? So having said that, what we saw in Poland, in Taiwan, in even parts of India, in the Philippines, I could not fight back directly. So you become a punching bag for a little while. And no one wants to be a punching bag. But we came through by organizing communities of action. And that's really, I think, what women leadership does, right? Because I'm trying to think if I can think of a female autocrat. I guess I can. If you like Madame Mao, maybe, like think about it, right? The dictators to be today, building these communities of action in the real world brings back a semblance of civility, shared purpose,
Right.
shared reality. I mean, again, look at Secretary Clinton. Hillary Clinton is a great example. She was attacked forever. And yet she continued, right? And slowly it is coming out, it's turning out. That's not a really great answer, but part of it is I just do not think if we play in the virtual world that's been created by these flawed designs, we just make more money for them. But we need to take people out of it. So in our end in Rappler, and for a lot of other countries now, including Taiwan and Germany, it's time to build deliberative technology. That why do we keep giving them money? Why will I take our 15 million unique users in Rappler and keep throwing them back into manipulated landscapes, right? Where they can be insidiously manipulated. We began to build something on the Matrix protocol. It's the protocol, internet protocol that's used by France and Germany because they care about privacy. Taiwan built a matrix on the Matrix protocol as well. So look, it's like, please fix yourselves, right? Because only the tech companies can act right now. And instead of what we are seeing, which is like they've seen Elon Musk go to the sub-basement, and instead of raising him up, they've lowered themselves down. They've gotten rid of the guardrails that were in place in 2020. And now that we have a woman leader running, that means she's completely exposed, right? So appealing to these social media companies that have so much power to actually put guardrails in place. Think about the safety of women, the safety of our democracies, and do what's right.
Wow. Well, Maria, if you have time, we would love to take a couple questions. If we
Sure,
can.
of course.
So I'm gonna let Alan Friedman, our head of crisis response, who has been working to put together the incredible summit we're gonna be having in Warsaw.
I wish I could come.
Alan, are there any questions coming in on the chat that we want?
We have, in fact, thanks so much, Maria. Thanks so much, Elise, for this conversation, and greetings from Warsaw. We're looking forward to next week, and we will miss you very much, Maria. I want to focus on one question, which is how can women in leadership roles best support each other to thrive? You talked a lot about systems, which are incredibly important. But I think this question, my sense is this question goes to personal connection, because at the end of the day, we need to support each other. One of the things we've heard over and over again in our research for the summit is we need to support each other to be well and to carry this fight forward, and no matter what context we do it. Would you mind talking a bit to that question?
Sure, and I can
What
kind
a
of,
beautiful question.
yeah, I can space this in the short and medium term, right? I think in the short term, look exactly at what Vital Voices is doing, right? It is pulling together strong women in different countries around the world. We can add another layer on top of that, is that we not only come together in the physical world, but also the virtual world. And so being more purpose-driven in the way we can actually collaborate together in a virtual world, right? So that means, for example, that if there is a woman in Brazil, a woman president in Moldova, right? And the woman president in Moldova is getting attacked. Brazil just took action against X, right? Because women were under attack. Well, not because of that, there's lots of other reasons, but I guess that we can do something very similar to what Michelle Ferrios did, which is if Elise is being attacked, Elise doesn't have to respond. In fact, the rest of us should be the ones responding. We did a version of that in Rappler where, you know, I had a young female journalist whom Duterte targeted. She never had to protect herself. We protected her, or tried, right? Because that was really at the beginning of the deluge. So the first one is a much more, because we can map the information ecosystem and we can actually create nodes of action in different parts of the world, right? So that's one of the things we can do. Because guess what? Not only can we do that, we've done this with 150 groups in the Philippines, but companies do this to protect themselves, right? I think the second thing is we need to come together and push for better the legislation that we need in each of our countries. Because again, if you look at Latin America, you look at Southeast Asia, you look at North Asia, you look at North America, these tech companies, and you're not just talking social media, but generative AI, in many ways, they are pushing forward with impunity, right? You have, anyway, let me not talk about copyright and things. This is a time of massive churn, change, and we need to bring women front and center to this dialogue so we can define the world where we do not lose leadership and we make sure that the world becomes as inclusive as possible.
That's great. You know, earlier this week, we were in conversation with Ann Applebaum, who has her new book about her
Yes,
CE.
of course.
And you know, one of the arguments that she makes, and this is certainly true, is that, you know, how deeply interconnected
Intertwined they are, right.
autocrats play off each other. Okay, this happened, so I can do this over here while people are looking over there, and vice versa.
Yeah.
And I think you bring up a great point that there needs to be not just that counter playbook, but the counter network
Right.
that is supporting and protecting and amplifying those voices for democracy, for peace.
And you have them
Yeah.
already, right? We have them, and you're gonna be together in Warsaw. And it's actually really fascinating. Some of the leaders in Warsaw, the mayor of Warsaw is an academic who used social media, right? So it's about building communities of action, not just in the physical world, but in the virtual world, and then using that for policy-driven change.
Maria, it is always wonderful to spend time with you. I know you feel like you bring, you know, sort of doom and gloom of news,
Sorry.
but you have such incredible energy, and just your ability to stay focused on your goal always gives me so much hope.
Vice
Always.
versa. Vice
Always.
versa. It's how we keep going forward, right?
And today we were thrilled to launch a piece of research we announced together last March at Columbia University with your new,
The Institute of
Institute.
Global Politics.
yeah. And you have a lab there, right? It's a-
Yes,
Your
the
innovation
innovation lab.
Innovation
Yeah.
lab.
the IGP is also co-led by the Dean of School of International Public Affairs, Karen Yari-Millo, and Secretary Hillary Clinton. So cool.
Yeah,
I'm glad we did this.
incredible women coming together to, and that report was, is released today. So it's out there, and it gives some great recommendations also, but really looking at the growth of tech facilitated gender-based violence, how it is being used as a tool. But I think lessons from women who have dealt with it.
Yeah.
And things that we can do to protect ourselves.
Yeah.
And also things that we can do to band together to push back against it.
I mean, it's interesting because one of the principal authors is Nina Yankovic.
Yes.
Who really was, you know, again, in some ways abandoned by the government, right?
Mm.
I mean, that was kind of, and she moved forward. And then the other woman who edited on our side at IGP is Camille Francois,
Yes.
also part of Vital Voices. Camille Francois, you'll see her in my book, How to Stand Up to a Dictator. She was part of Jigsaw when she was the head of research, and Google decided not to publish this report in 2017, which was really the first time that it looked globally at gendered misogyny, right? Or misogyny in gender disinformation, starting in Ecuador. It was the first time I saw this idea. So Camille looks at it from a very technical perspective. She's quite hopeful about technical change, more hopeful than I am. Yeah.
She is incredible. And it was, what was so wonderful is we all came together in Venice around the DVF
Yes.
Awards a year ago.
Yes.
Just a year ago, and obviously got right to work. And I think you were so much of the inspiration for that. So thank you.
No, thank you for bringing us all together. Read the
Yeah.
report.
Yeah. Yes, thank you all, and have a great rest of your day. For those of you who are going to be with us in Warsaw, we look forward to being with you and further exploring and unpacking these ideas and coming up with really concrete solutions that we can push forward together. So thank you. Thank you, Maria.
No, thanks for having me. Look, we match. So-
Yes.
We didn't want to.
And here's the book.